Hi folks, and welcome to another list opener for my nostalgia trip games. This time we have the Sega Master System under inspection. And I have to say my personal history with the Master System was kind of brief, because only one of my friends had one. And I can only remember like a handful of games, two of which were inbuilt into the machine. So, naturally I had to hunt down one myself. And I will get into those two games later on. I currently have only one working joypad and light gun, and just about maybe 9 or 10 games. So I can only do one proper episode at the moment. But I think I will get into the Master System a bit later on. But let's get on with it. Hope you enjoy.
One of the inbuilt games in this particular Master System is Hang On, an arcade port of the classic motorcycle racing game. As far as behind-viewed motorcycle racing games go on 8-bits, this is easily one of the best ones. Mind you, it doesn't differ from similar behind-viewed car racing games all that much. The game did break some ground in the arcades, however, by being one of the first arcade games to use 16-bit graphics, and more importantly, introducing the motion-controlled arcade cabinet, in which, in this particular case, you would be seated into a motorcycle seat and your body movements would correspond to the player's movements on the screen. Regardless of the obvious shortcomings in the home conversions, Hang On the Master System is one of the best examples of its genre on any of the 8-bits. Of course, you have to remember, Hang On was originally released to the arcades in July 1985, when the genre of racing games was in somewhat of a rut, having nothing particularly interesting coming out in the arcades, at least in this style. And most racing games from that time were top-down viewed, and most of the interesting ones were made for the home computers. Hang On changed the game with the new 60-bit hardware, the new force feedback technology, and I would hazard a guess, already having a bike to handle instead of a car probably brought interest enough to make the game successful. However, the main reason why it was a popular game on Sega's Master System console was because it was inbuilt into some of the models. And that's how I first got to play it, and that's how I mostly still do. From the two inbuilt games in this particular Master System, Safari Hunt was always the more repeatedly played one, mostly because back in the day, a laser gun in a gaming system was still an intriguing curiosity. As I hinted in my first NES episode, nowadays it's more of an inconvenience because you need to have an old-school CRT television for playing games with a laser gun. Safari Hunt is basically the Master System equivalent for Duck Hunt on the NES. There are vast differences though, namely in the amount of variety in level graphics, the amount and variety of targets zooming through the screen, and having a score limit to pass instead of a required amount of targets hit. I'll admit to Safari Hunt being the more interesting to play of the two mentioned light gun games, but it's also the more difficult one, and having more colorful and detailed graphics makes Safari Hunt more straining for the eyes. Actually, Safari Hunt was specifically written for this system ROM, and furthermore, it was never actually released as a separate cartridge, but can be found coupled on cartridges with Hang On, as well as a couple of other shooter games called Marksman Shooting and Trap Shooting. The third and final game from my actual nostalgia tripping games for today is the only actual cartridge game that I remember playing on my friend's Master System, Enduro Racer. If you recall, I mentioned Enduro Racer in the second ZX Spectrum episode, but the Master System version of Enduro Racer is completely different from any other version. Funnily enough, it's supposed to be a sequel, or a spin-off to Hang On, which it sort of is on every other platform. This I also mentioned in the comparison blog entry of Enduro Racer back in April 2016. Again, the link for the comparison is below in the video description if you want to check it out. The Master System version of Enduro Racer is the one I enjoy the most because it's simply more playable. Handling the bike through all the jumps and obstacles feels much more comfortable in the isometric view than in the behind view, particularly in any home computer or console conversion, because there's not only a better overall flow here, but also the bike controls better, or just less complicatedly. In simpler terms, the Master System Enduro Racer feels like a mixture between Paperboy and the original Enduro Racer, if you want a point of comparison, and it's a whole lot more fun than the arcade version and its straight ports. Oh, and in case you didn't know, the Japanese release has more tracks than the version released elsewhere, so if you have a chance to hunt it down and buy it, I would highly recommend it. As I said in the beginning of this episode, I bought my own Master System a few years ago with a cheap test game which I probably won't be playing too much, which is World Cup Italia 1990. From the quick test I had at it, it didn't feel too bad, but I just don't like football games in particular, so it's just a filler in my cupboard. Now, the first game that I actually bought for the sake of playing was Alien Storm. I still haven't played it enough to make much of a connection to it, but I have played enough of other versions of it to know that it's one of the better home conversions of the arcade original. It's a neat little street brawler game, a spiritual successor of sorts to the highly acclaimed Golden Axe, but with a futuristic sci-fi setting and additional first-person shooting segments between the street brawling levels. And to be honest, there's not all that much of real brawling going on since you're equipped with some sort of laser gun or something, and only when the enemies get close enough to you, you can use your arms and legs for fighting. It's not as fine-tuned as Golden Axe though, but it's not a particularly fitting game to draw a comparison to on further thought. And the Master System version isn't as close to the arcade game as the Mega Drive version is, but as an 8-bit conversion, it's easily the best in its league. The second game I bought for my Master System because I actually wanted it was Fantasy Zone. This is a game I got introduced to through MSX emulation and later on the NES on a Famicom pirate card, so it was a bit odd to realize that my first physical copy of the game was of the Master System. Funnily enough, it was only on the Master System that I finally learned how to play it properly, which is really why I'm including it here now. I'm still not very good at it though. In Fantasy Zone, you fly around a horizontally scrolling scenery in both available directions and shoot at various flying things, which usually drop some coins for you to pick up. Unless you've read the manual prior to playing the game for the first time, it might take a while for you to notice that you can also destroy those large, unmoving spawning chambers that spew some more enemies at you, but it takes a lot more bullets or bombs to make them disintegrate. Dead enemies and destroyed spawners drop coins of various size and value, and the coins actually represent money in this game, which is something I didn't realize until playing the game on my Sega. So for money, there has to be some use, and so you occasionally get warp points show up on the screen, which can take you to a shop to buy some better weapons or other useful things to equip your craft with. Obviously, you get the usual boss fights at the end of each level, and that kind of wraps up the whole game. Apart from the money and the shop stuff, the only other really notable thing that Fantasy Zone differs from most shooter games of its time is the graphics, which you can see are shockingly colorful and even psychedelic. High entertainment value, and I class this as one of the definitive Sega classics.